Okay, Shavous is coming up. This is, I guess, our last chance. So perhaps we'll spend a minute and talk about exactly what happened on Shavous. In our prayers, we say it is man matan Torah seinu. It is the time of the giving of the Torah. When we talk about exactly when the Torah was given, there are three different issues. One is, when was the revelation of the Ten Commandments, of the Aseret Dibros? It's one question. The second question is, when were the 613 commandments given? Which is a totally different issue. And the third is, when was the text of the Sefer Torah given, which is a third issue. Because, of course, the text of the Sefer Torah has much more than just the mitzvahs. We also have the stories, the historical record. When was that given? Now, if we assume that when we say Shavous is man matan Torah seinu, Shavous is the day that the Torah was given, if we assume that it means all three parts, the Ten Commandments plus the 613 mitzvahs plus the text of the Sefer Torah, we're going to have a Back to the Future problem.
Yeah.
Because there are many things in the Sefer Torah, historical events, which obviously post-date the giving of the Torah in Har Sinai. And if the Torah gives us a record of the 40 years of the Jews' travels from the Exodus until the threshold of Eretz Yisrael, and 39 and a half of those years followed the revelation of Mount Sinai. So if it was all given on Mount Sinai, we'd have a problem. The Jews received a record of events which had not yet happened. And of course, we would have expected that some of the mistakes could have been avoided.
Yeah, like why send the spies and all that.
Right, if they got the story in advance. So the truth is this, that there are three different issues. As we know that there was a revelation to the entire Jewish nation. The entire Jewish nation stood on Mount Sinai, and God spoke to them. And what God said to them was the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments. That is described in Parshas Yisro, that on a specific day, God revealed himself to the entire people and communicated to them the Ten Commandments. Moshe Rabbeinu then went up to Mount Sinai. After that, if you read the Chumash, it tells us, after that he went up to Har Sinai, and he was there for 40 days, during which he apparently received more information, and at the end of which he came down with the two tablets in which the Ten Commandments were inscribed. The Gemara records two disputes regarding these events. First, the Gemara in Masechah Shavous records a dispute. What was the calendar date of the public revelation? The Rabbanon say that the calendar date was the 6th of Sivan, which corresponds exactly to our Yom Tov of Shavuos. We observe Shavuos on the 6th day of Sivan. Rabbi Yosef says that the revelation was on the 7th day of Sivan, which is an odd coincidence that we should celebrate a holiday just the day before that. Because we celebrate a holiday on the 6th of Sivan, and it happens to be that this major event in Jewish history took place exactly one day later, on the 7th of Sivan. It's a little bit of a mystery. Now this question, the Magen Avraham points out that commentator to the Shulchan Aruch, that in our prayers we make reference to the fact that Shavuos is the day of the giving of the Torah, but this really is a dispute. According to the Rabbanon, it is the case that the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan. According to Rabbi Yosef, really the Torah was given the next day. Now, how difficult this question is, whether it's a serious problem or a minor problem, really depends on a very interesting thing, that the Torah never makes an explicit connection between the holiday of Shavuos and the giving of the Torah. If you look in the Chumash, there is no explicit connection made between the giving of the Torah and the holiday of Shavuos. In the Torah, Shavuos is presented always as an agricultural festival. It celebrates the harvest. Pesach celebrates the Aviv, the sprouting of the grain. Shavuos, 7 weeks later, celebrates the Katsir, the harvest. These 7 weeks is the time during which the grain grows. So it's an agricultural festival, and therefore the date could be the day that the Torah happened to be given. It could be the day before the Torah was given, but it's really not a serious problem either way. It's only because in our thinking we've created an association, and the Chazal created this association, the giving of the Torah and Shavuos. And also there's another factor, which is that we've left the farm. Right? So to us, agricultural holidays have no significance at all. So we would not celebrate Shavuos. We would not be motivated to celebrate Shavuos because it is a celebration of the harvest. Because we are far removed from the farm. And we buy our groceries in the supermarket. So for us, Shavuos only has significance because of the rabbinic connection to the giving of the Torah, and that, as the Magen points out, is problematic because it may be Shavuos is yesterday, but it may be that Shavuos happens to be the day before, which is a very odd thing. Okay, that we won't deal with. Just we're dealing with the historical question. So the revelation either was on the 6th or it was on the 7th. Everyone agrees, the Talmud says, and if you work out the biblical chronology, it works out this way, that Moshe went up on the 7th. Either he went up on the day of the revelation or he went up on the day after the revelation, but he went up on the 7th of Sivan to spend his 40 days there. During those 40 days, he was given the 613 mitzvahs. That's when he got the rest of the Torah. This is the expression the Gemara says that Moshe went up likabule sha'ar Torah, to receive the rest of the Torah. And the implication is that it was in those first 40 days that he was given the rest of the 613 mitzvahs. By the way, I'll just throw out a question for you. Of the 613 mitzvahs, how many are included in the 10 Commandments?
None.
No.
Aren't they all sort of represented?
Well, in a broad sense. But of the 613, how many are in the 10 Commandments? Well, the most obvious guess would be
Five.
would be 10, right? If there are 10 commandments, you think that
The first 5
this
are
should
five.
comprise 10 of the 613 mitzvahs.
Yeah.
In fact, according to the Rambam at least, the correct answer is 14.
14.
14. Yeah.
Oh, but you only have 10.
Because if you look carefully at the 10 Commandments,
Yeah.
you'll see that the second commandment is comprised of 4 different mitzvahs.
Oh.
It has 4 different sub-clauses, and the 5th commandment has 2. So that adds an extra 4 altogether. So there are 14 of the 613. So therefore Moshe went up to receive 599 more mitzvahs. 14 were communicated to the Jewish people on the day of the revelation, which is either the 6th or the 7th of Sivan. On the 7th of Sivan, he went up to the mountain for another 40 days, and he received the remaining 599 mitzvahs. There is a dispute in the Talmud whether Moshe got those mitzvahs during those 40 days with all the detail, or whether the detail was added later. Because when we read the Chumash, you find an amazing thing, that God speaks to Moshe in several places. He speaks to Moshe on the mountain. He speaks to Moshe in the Mishkan, in the sanctuary, after the sanctuary was built. And we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, in turn, speaks to the Jewish people. And according to Chazal, this was really a prophetic experience. It was Shechina Medaberes Mitoch Grona. It was the divine presence speaking through the throat of Moshe, so to speak. And this was on the plains of Moab, at the threshold of Eretz Yisrael. So there are 3 different places where God is speaking. God is speaking on the mountain, God is speaking in the sanctuary, God is speaking in the plains of Moab. So how do you account for that? So there's a dispute in the Talmud. Rabbi Yishmael says that when we say that Moshe got the rest of the Torah, all 613 mitzvahs during the 40 days, that was only in a general sense. Klalos Nemru Sinai. Only the general principles were said on Har Sinai. But the details were filled in later. Some in the sanctuary, some on the plains of Moab. The details were given later. So when we say that we got the Torah on Har Sinai during the 40 days, the remaining mitzvahs, that means only in a general sense. We got the general rules. But the specific details, and each mitzvah has a myriad of details, those were given later. Rabbi Akiva argues, and this is the opinion that Rashi cites in his commentary to Chumash. A few weeks ago we had it in Parshas Bahar, it's well known. He says, Klalais upratais nemru b'Sinai. That in the 40 days, Moshe Rabbeinu got the 613 mitzvahs with all the details, all the laws. V'nishnu b'ayol moed, they were reviewed in the sanctuary. V'nishtalshu b'harvas Moab, in the plains of Moab, they were repeated a third time. But he got them during the 40 days. And since Rashi embraces this opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, let's assume this. We'll put Rabbi Shmuel on the back burner, and we'll embrace Rabbi Akiva and assume that is the case. So far we've established the following, that the Ten Commandments were revealed to the Jewish people on the day of the public revelation, which either was the 6th or the 7th of Sivan. On the 7th of Sivan, Moshe went up for an additional 40 days. During those 40 days, we'll assume Rabbi Akiva is correct, he received the remainder of the 613 mitzvahs with all of their details. That's what he learned over the 40 days. The 613 mitzvahs with all of the details. So someone was going to ask, yeah, it's a lot to learn in 40 days. Because we struggle over 40 days just to figure out some small things, but Moshe had a good teacher. Right?
Rabbi, is that the Torah, the oral Torah that
That's the oral Torah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me explain this, but I'll explain it as we go ahead. Now, but this is again a discussion of the Ten Commandments and the 613 mitzvahs. Now, there's another question. What about the text of the Sefer Torah, which, as we said, in addition to the mitzvahs, also contains the historical record? Here, there is a different dispute in the Gemara. This is Maseches Gittin and Daf Samach. A different dispute in the Gemara as to when this was given. There's one opinion which says Torah Megillah Nitna. The Torah was given in installments. Meaning, over the course of the 40 years, it was dictated by God to Moshe in installments, and it was only completed at the end of the 40 years. There's another opinion, and the Ramban in Chumash says that the simple reading of the text seems to follow this opinion, is that Torah Chasuma Nitna, that the text of the Torah was given complete at the end of the 40 years. Torah Chasuma Nitna, meaning at the end of the 40 years, God called Moshe Rabbeinu and said, take dictation. And he dictated to him the entire text of the Torah, from the base of Bereshis, which is the first word of the Torah, to the Lamed of Yisrael, which is the last word of the Torah, at the end of the 40 years. And Moshe Rabbeinu transcribed it as a scribe. And that's when we got the text of the Sefer Torah. And the Torah itself talks about how Moshe Rabbeinu gave that first Sefer Torah for safekeeping to the Leviim, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we have three different times for the Torah having been given. We have the Ten Commandments on the 6th or 7th of Sivan. We have the 613 mitzvahs during the 40 days Moshe was on the mountain. And we have the text of the Sefer Torah. Again, we'll take the opinion which the Ramban accepts, which is that it was dictated to Moshe at the end of the 40 years. Yeah.
I got a problem with that. Okay, if you look at the first 4 books of Torah, it makes sense. But the Deuteronomy, if he's dictating, why has he changed the stories? They're not exactly the same, word for word.
No, so let's understand what this means.
Yeah.
Sefer Devarim is an account of Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell addresses. Because as they were said by Moshe, they were Moshe's own words. At the end of the 40 years, God told Moshe Rabbeinu that I want you to transcribe an account of the farewell addresses that you gave. So therefore God dictated to Moshe write that Moshe gathered the people and said such and such. Now the truth is the Torah quotes many people. The Torah quotes Paro, quotes Bilam, right? Quotes wicked people, Lavan, etc. Their words, as they came from their mouths, were not holy words. It was when Paro said to Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who is God that I should listen to His word? Those are not holy words. Those are blasphemous words. But when God told Moshe Rabbeinu, I want you to write in the Torah the account of what Paro said, those words, as they are written in the Torah, are holy words because they're part of the Torah. Right? The words of Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, were holy even as he said them, because they were filled with Torah content and great value, but they became part of the Torah scroll when God dictated to Moshe, right, an account of Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell addresses. Now, I can explain a point which is very, very subtle, and it's a little confusing, but I think you can handle it. There was a literary technique that was used by authors of many Jewish books. What they would do is they would compose a short text and then a commentary to their own text. Now, normally we think of commentaries written by other people, but this was a literary technique. They would compose a short text and then their own commentary to the text. So, for example, the great Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who we know, the author of the Mesilas Yesharim, Zerach Hashem, and Das Tfunas, wrote a sefer called Kalach Pischei Chachma, the 138 Gateways to Wisdom. And this is a text of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. And basically, there are 138 short paragraphs. Some of the paragraphs are just single sentences. And he lays down 138 basic principles of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah. Now, each of those sentences are dense with meaning. So he wrote a commentary to explain what he meant by that sentence. Wow. So if the sentence has 10 words, he would then, in his commentary, say that the first word means such and such, and he'd elaborate on it. And by the second word, I mean such and such, and he'd elaborate on that. And the third word means such and such, he'd elaborate on that. So there was a text, and there was a commentary. Why did he write it that way? I mean, no one would understand the text without the commentary. But the answer is very simple. That once you've gone through the book once, you could now review the text without the commentary. Whereas you're right, the first time around, you would need the commentary to understand what the text means. But now that you've already gone through it once, so presumably you understand the text, relying on the commentary. Now to review, all you have to do is review the text, which is a tremendous saving of time. Because probably the text is 1/10 of the work, and the commentary is 9/10 of the work. So once you come through the use of the commentary to understand the text, now all you have to do is review the text. There were other authors who used this technique. Not in entire books, but for example, the famous sefer Beis Elokim by the Mabit, and he would give a sentence relating to a given topic, and then he would expound on the sentence which he composed to explain each term of the sentence and its implications and its meaning and so on and so forth. This was a literary technique. Now, the Torah was also given that way. When God gave the mitzvahs to Moshe Rabbeinu, he did it the exact same way. He did it in the manner of text and commentary. And this is before anything was written. It was all oral. When Moshe stood on the mountain those first 40 days, it was only written down. Even at the end of the 40 days, the only thing that was written down at that point was the Ten Commandments. But the rest of the 613 mitzvahs were taught to Moshe orally. And they were taught in the manner of text and commentary. So, for example, take a mitzvah like the prohibition of eating meat and milk cooked together. The Torah says, Lo savashel gidi b'chalev imo. do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. So in Hebrew we have 5 words. Lo savashel gedi b'chalev yimo. Don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. That's the text. Now the question is, what is the precise meaning of the various terms? When we say a goat, Lo savashel gedi, or a gedi really is a kid. It's a baby goat. Is that just an illustration? Is it specifically a baby goat as opposed to a lamb or a calf? Or is it a baby goat as opposed to an adult goat, an A's? Is it its mother's milk? Is that the only prohibition, but, for example, another goat's milk would be okay? Or if the milk comes from a different species, if it was cow's milk, maybe that's even... So the text itself doesn't give us clarity. So there was a commentary. Right? God explained what he meant. That he said, goat, here is only an illustration. Right? The prohibition doesn't only apply to goat, it applies to beef, applies to lamb, etc. It does not apply to birds and fish, because it only applies to species whose females give milk. Mammals. It doesn't apply to fish or birds. Right? Fish is not even a rabbinic prohibition. You can have fish with milk. Fowl is prohibited rabbinically. So the prohibition of eating chicken with milk, a chicken cheeseburger, is only midrabanan. Because the commentary to the text tells us that gedi is not specifically goat. It really includes all other animals as well, but specifically mammals as opposed to birds and fish. Chalev imo, its mother's milk, doesn't mean its mother's milk specifically. That's just a figure of speech. It really means the milk of any other kosher animal. And what does it mean to cook? What is the definition of cooking? Also a very complex question. Does cooking mean boiling? If you fry meat and butter, is that called cooking? If you bake them together, is that called cooking? I mean, the halakha is yes, but that we only know through the commentary. During those 40 days, as it was given to Moshe, both the text and the commentary were oral. Nothing was committed to writing. And therefore, at that point, we could not speak of the Torah shebechsav and the Torah sheba'al peh, the written law and the oral law, because everything was oral. But at the end of the 40 years, when God dictated to Moshe Rabbeinu, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, record in the Torah the historical account of my having given you the text. And we'll have a parasha which says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, that God spoke to Moshe, and they gave him various mitzvahs. And one of the mitzvahs is the mitzvah of Lo savashel gedi b'chalev yimo. At that point, the text of the mitzvah was incorporated into the Torah scroll, but the commentary was left out. So when the Torah scroll was written, including the text of the 613 mitzvahs, at that point, we now could call the text Torah shebechsav, the written Torah, and we could call the commentary Torah sheba'al peh, the oral Torah. But as they were given during the first 40 days, they both were oral. It was text and commentary. The text was incorporated into the Torah scroll and thus became Torah shebechsav, and the commentary remained oral and thus became Torah sheba'al peh. That is the overview of what was given when. Question?
Just that the Jewish people themselves only personally received the first 2 of the 10. The rest was on trust, right?
No, that's correct. The Talmud tells us that on the day of the revelation, after the Jews heard 2 of the 10, they said, that's it. Says, we're scared. Right? To hear God's voice, thunder, lightning, smoke, etc. We hear more, we'll die. And therefore the last 8 were communicated through Moshe.
Did they hear anything when God was talking to Moshe, or nothing more after that?
It seems they didn't hear it. At that point, God acquiesced to their desire not to hear anymore.
Well,
And it was on the basis of their hearing God saying to Moshe, "You are my..."
Now, you're raising another question. And this is a very important question, which is that what is the basis of the Jewish people's conviction that Moshe Rabbeinu was a true prophet? Because how do they know that Moshe Rabbeinu is in fact speaking in God's name and truthfully representing what God says? Now the Rambam talks about this, and perhaps to fully appreciate the words of the Rambam, we should begin with another question, which is that we know there are Nevi'im, there is prophetic experience. Nevi'im communicate their messages from God to the Jewish people. How do we ever know that a Navi, that a prophet is a Navi Emes, a true prophet? And maybe he's just a... You know, it's an interesting thing, just as an aside, that if you go to yeshivas, big yeshivas, you'll often find that there are homeless people or vagrants that hang out there and claim to be Nevi'im, claim to be prophets.
really?
Now you wonder, why do these people hang out in yeshivas? Now the answer is because people in yeshivas are nice. But if they go to certain other places, they'll be thrown out. Right? But you know, people in yeshivas are easygoing, so if the guy minds his own business, you know, doesn't disturb anybody, they'll let the guy hang around and eat, and maybe even sleep there. So you often find that, especially big yeshivas, you have some aberrant personalities hanging around. I remember when I taught in Florida, in a certain yeshiva, there was a fellow who I think was convinced that he really was Mashiach, which is not a uncommon delusion rather. And but he had a mishigas that he believed that fluorescent light bulbs somehow ionized the air or something. It was really very, very dangerous. When he come to visit me in my office, it was very important that I keep the lights off because you know, fluorescent bulbs. So I obliged, and I turned the lights off, and I talked to him a little bit, and you know, amuse him. But how do you know? A person comes and claims to be a Navi. How do you know that he's really a Navi, not just some deluded person? Now the Torah says that as a rule, the Navi has to supply one of two methods of proof. One is called an os, and the other is called a moface. One is called a sign, the other is called a demonstration. What is the difference between an os and a moface? An os means a supernatural sign. If the Navi performs some miracle that can only be done by God, that proves that God sent him. Because I'll prove to you that God speaks to me, tomorrow the sun will rise in the west. If it happens, you know, it's not the kind of thing you can do yourself.
Yeah.
So it means, in fact, God sent him. We find in the Chumash that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, when he was sent to Paro, was given signs. The staff turning into a snake, his hand turning leprous, water turning to blood. He was given signs. Those are called osos. A moface is a demonstration. It's a proof. It means a super accurate prediction of the future. If a Navi makes a prediction, a detailed prediction of the future, and it comes true to every detail, that also is a proof that God must have spoken to him, because otherwise how would he know? Now when I say an accurate prediction of the future, I don't mean like Nostradamus, you know, who will say something cryptic like there'll be a war and one side will win. You know, that doesn't mean anything. It means that, for example, he'll tell you for the first 1,000 stocks on the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow, which is going to go up, which is going to go down by how much. Right? So if he gives you 1,000 stocks, this will be up a quarter of a point, down half a point, this will stay the same, and so on and so forth. And sure enough, the next day, it happens. You know, this guy must be a true Navi. How would he figure that out? You can't guess that kind of thing. Right? And by the way, I just want to mention one thing, that if he says, God told me that the 1,000 stocks are going on like this, and he's right about 999, and one, he's off. We don't say, well, that's pretty good.
No, he's still not.
Right? He's considered a Navi Sheker, he's a false prophet, and he's executed.
Yeah.
Right? Because he said something in God's name, which God obviously didn't tell him. Right? If you got all the stocks right, except for one, but he said in God's name that that stock is going to go up a quarter of a point, it went down a quarter of a point. Right? He said something in God's name God didn't say. That's a capital offense. So if he makes a super accurate prediction like that, you know he's a Navi. But the Rambam says a very surprising thing. The Rambam says that when a Navi performs an os or a mofes, really we wouldn't believe him. We really wouldn't believe him. Because it's still possible that he's doing it with sorcery, magic, lucky guessing. You know, he's a handicapper. You know, you can figure out the stocks and the horses. The reason we believe him is because that is a law of the Torah itself. The Torah says, one of the laws of the Torah is that if you have a Navi who supplies an os or a mofes, you listen to the Navi. You're obligated to listen to the Navi. So it's a gzeres hakosov, it's a decree of the Torah, that if a Navi gives this type of evidence, you should believe him, accept him, and follow what he says. So it's ultimately a decree of the Torah. If the Torah had not decreed it, we wouldn't say that this is objective proof of his being a prophet. The Rambam says this is analogous to another law of the Torah. The Torah says that if two witnesses testify in a court of law, we accept their testimony. Now, you think about it for a moment. Just because two people's story matched doesn't mean that it's the truth. I mean, it could be a conspiracy. It could be they got together. It could be they worked it out. It's not conclusive. But the Torah says that this is good enough. That in a court of law, if you have two eyewitnesses and their stories match, you believe them. It's a decree of the Torah. So says the Rambam. So the law that you believe a Navi who provides a sign or a demonstration is also a decree of the Torah. So the question is, so how did the Torah start though? How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu is a true prophet? Because once we already have a Torah, okay, so the Torah decreed we should accept the proofs that a prophet brings. But until the Torah is established, that law isn't operative. So how do we know that the Torah is true? How do we know that Moshe is a Navi Emes? So the Rambam says in memorable words, that Moshe Rabbeinu lo ha'aminu bo Yisrael b'nei ha'oso sh'asa. That the Jews did not believe in Moshe as being a prophet because of the signs and wonders that he made. Sha'mamin al pi ha'osos, if a person believes in the basis of wonders, yesh b'libo dofi. There's always a nagging doubt. Maybe it was sorcery, maybe it was magic, maybe it was smoke and mirrors. You never know for sure. Once the Torah was given, the Torah says, listen, don't question. That satisfies the divine requirement. But that's not how we believe Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we believe Moshe Rabbeinu? Because the Jewish people were witnesses to his being a prophet. Because when, after the revelation, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech emor lahem, go tell the Jews, Shuva lochem la'ol alechem, go back to your tents after the Ten Commandments were given, Va'ata pa amodi modi, but you come here up to me, and I will command you the mitzvahs. The Jewish people heard those words.
Yeah.
The Jewish people heard those words.
That's the they heard Moshe.
They heard God telling Moshe Rabbeinu, tell everyone else to go home, the revelation is over, the Ten Commandments have been given, but you come with me. You come up here, and I will command you the mitzvahs. So they are witnesses to Moshe Rabbeinu as being a prophet. So there's no question about it. They know that Moshe Rabbeinu is a prophet. They know that Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to God, or God speaks to him, I should say, because they heard God speak to Moshe. Now, there's another question. But even a prophet, can't a prophet corrupt his message?
We see the wrong.
Let's say God told me to tell you something, and I don't think that it's a good idea or that you'll appreciate it, so I modify it, I edit it, I amend it. I mean, isn't that possible? So it's true, you can't doubt Moshe's being a prophet. That we know. We know that God speaks to Moshe, or at least on one occasion spoke to Moshe. So to doubt that he's not a prophet, he's not of the stature which is necessary for being a prophet, you can't question that. We know we overheard God speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu. But maybe Moshe Rabbeinu perverted the message. That can't be. That can't be. And the Ohr Sameach writes on this extensively. And he says the reason it can't be is because the nature of a prophetic experience is such that when you get it, to change it, to twist it, to corrupt it, is inconceivable, unimaginable. Now that might be true, but how did the Jewish people know that? That the Ohr Sameach doesn't say, but I'll give you an answer to that question. Now there's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says when the Jews stood at Mt Sinai, God held the mountain over them like a barrel and said, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, this should be your burial place. Right?
Wow.
The question is, what does that mean?
Yeah, is that real?
Do we take that literally? Is that figurative? No, the Meshech Chochmah in another place, the Maral, say that this is a figure of speech. It's a mushal. It's a parable. It really means like this. It means that the prophetic experience was so clear that to defy it was inconceivable. In other words, if I would tell you, stick your hand in the fire, the negative consequences are so obvious that it will be inconceivable that you should want to do that. See, here too, it's the same idea. That they stood at Har Sinai and they heard the word of God. To corrupt it, to twist it, to distort it was inconceivable. Now, to violate it is possible. That's an important thing to understand. That to ignore it, to break it, to go against it, that's possible. But to say it never happened, to misrepresent it, that you can't do. That you can't do. I can disobey my parents, but I can't deny that they're my parents. Right? There's certain things you can do, there's certain things you can't do. Right? I could disobey them, but I can't, my father tells me to do something, I can't go to him and say, who are you? Do I know you? You can't say that, right? Here we have a father and a son. We can ask them. It could be the son will disobey, but he's not going to tell his father, I don't know you. You're a stranger. So this is the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu, it was understood, could not, in God's name, say X if God in fact said Y. And the Jewish people understood that. The Jewish people understand when you have that type of prophetic experience, it is so compelling, it's as if there's a barrel over your head. You can't distort it. Can't be. And it may be, I would suggest, that the reason God subjected them to this type of experience is that they should have confidence in Moshe Rabbeinu. They should understand that when you have that type of prophecy, you're not going to distort it. And therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu came and told them in God's name, such and such, 650 mitzvahs, they knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them the truth. Now, you may raise an objection that we know there was someone in Chumash who did doubt Moshe Rabbeinu. And that was Korach. Right? Korach questioned Moshe Rabbeinu. He questioned that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was making up things. We talked about this in a class many years ago, and we explained that Korach was a different issue. In other words, Korach was not questioning that when Moshe spoke in God's name, that Moshe might have twisted God's words. Korach was questioning something else. Korach was questioning that who says that everything that Moshe does, God told him to do. Maybe there are things that he does on his own. Because of course Moshe would not say that God said X if God really said Y. But there could be many areas in which Moshe Rabbeinu was making things up. And we pointed out because, let's ask ourselves the question. Moshe Rabbeinu was a leader, and he did many things. Many of the things he did, God told him to do. Did he have to publicly announce this fact? Whenever he did something, you should know that God told me to do this? For example, the specific thing that Korach was upset about was a political position. The sons of Kahas had a Nasi, they had a prince. His name was Elitzophan ben Uziel. And Korach held that he was really higher in seniority. He should have gotten the position. So he says, you see, Moshe Rabbeinu, he appointed this person on his own. It was his own idea. And it's not fair, I should have gotten the job. Now, he's not saying that God told Moshe to appoint Korach, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, I'm going to appoint Elitzophan ben Uziel. He's saying like this. He says, of course, what God tells Moshe to do, Moshe is not going to twist around. But there are things that Moshe does on his own. When everything he does, God tells him to do. Now, why was Korach able to say that? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, when he appointed Elitzophan ben Uziel, did not make a public announcement that you should know I did this because God told me to do it. Whose business is it? This is between Moshe and Elitzophan. When he has to tell the whole world, no, you should know that I'm doing this al pi Hashem, by the word of God. He doesn't have to do that. And therefore, there were things that Moshe did that Korach suspected. But Korach never would have questioned something that Moshe explicitly said in God's name, that Moshe would twist it around. That can't be. That they knew that it's inconceivable to do a thing like that. So that's how we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was a prophet. We know he was a prophet because we were witnesses to that. And we know he didn't corrupt his message because that is inconceivable. Now, the question is this. Well, that's very good for the people who stood at Mount Sinai. But we are, 50 generations removed. How do we know that our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents heard God speak to Moshe Rabbeinu? Right? That, the Ramban Chumash says, is because of the unbroken chain of tradition. But the problem really comes up, that what you do when the chain of tradition has been broken. Now, like the Ramban says, there's an assumption that on matters of great importance, parents are truthful to their children. Parents don't tell myths to their children. And therefore, if a Jewish parent tells his child that God spoke to Moshe on Mt Sinai, undoubtedly he heard it from his father, heard it from his father, heard it from his father, all the way back from his mother, and we can trust that because Jewish parents would not bequeath a falsehood to their children. Now, there are several problems, and nowadays we do tell lies to our children. Tooth fairy, things like that. Ida was in tooth pulled recently. My student said, I can put it under your pillow? I said, no, not me. I don't believe in the tooth fairy. But, some of them may still believe. And, the stork. And, my favorite myth that we tell our children, as we put them to bed, is we're not going anywhere, we're here. We're not going out. Remember that one? That chestnut? Of course we're going out, right? As soon as the kid is asleep, we're out, But we tell them. Now, it probably means on matters of great importance. Little white lies maybe we do tell. But a more serious problem is, what about people who have become estranged from religion? And Now they don't have that unbroken chain through their parents, through their grandparents, through their great-grandparents. So how do you jumpstart a new chain of tradition? This is a very, very tough question. And this is what a lot of energy has been devoted to try to find internal proofs that the Torah is a true document. In a sense, it's almost like the Navi, that if you can bring a mo-face, a demonstration that what he's saying must have been commanded by God, that gives you the license to believe in everything that he says. So we look for hints that the Torah was given by God. We look for predictions that the Torah makes, which came true, and so on and so forth. And of course, every outreach movement delves into this because they're trying to reach out to people that are not beneficiaries of this chain of tradition. But this is something that is beyond the scope of our discussion tonight. So this is really just an overview of exactly what happened on Shavous. We have 10 minutes. Let me leave you with a thought you could mull over. Because there is a custom to read on the second day of Shavous the Megillah of Reefs. And the reason is given for this. The Megillah of Reefs is the genealogy of David HaMelech. Right? Reus was the great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech. The genealogy is explained in the Megillah itself. And David HaMelech's yahrzeit, the anniversary of his passing, was on Shavous. He passed away on Shavous. There are commentators that say that we should assume that he was born on Shavous as well. Because the Talmud says that the greatest tzaddikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu grants full years. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Memalei Shnaseinu Shel Tzaddik, gives them full years. So Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, was born and died on the same day. He was given 120 full years. David was given 70 years, but 70 full years. So if we know the date of his death, that the Talmud says that he died on Shavous, Talmud Yerushalmi, so we should assume that undoubtedly he was born on the same day. So Shavous is both the day of his birth and his passing. Therefore, we read Megillah Reefs, which is the story of his ancestors. Now the question is like this, that the fact that he's born and died on Shavous is noteworthy. If I were to ask you, who should the hero of Shavous be? If Shavous is important because this is the day we got the Torah, so the hero of Shavous should be who? Moshe should be the hero of Shavous, right? Now Moshe was not born on Shavous, but it's interesting that he may really have a connection to Shavous. When was he born? He was born on Zayin Adar, which is 3 months before Zayin Sivan. Now the Torah tells us an amazing thing. The Torah tells us that when he was born, there was a decree that Jewish babies had to be drowned, but his parents were able to hide him for 3 months. What's the story? So the story is like this. Because Amram, who was the father of Moshe Rabbeinu, was separated from his wife. We don't know the story. Because he said, what's the point of having children if they're going to be drowned? So he separated from his wife. This was a public thing. His daughter Miriam came and said, your decree is worse than Paro. So as Paro is drowning the boys, at least the girls survive, but if everyone follows your example, there'll be no children born at all. So he took Yocheved back. So that was also a public event. So everyone knew when they were back together. The separation probably was over a long period of time. But everyone knew when they got married again, when he took her back. And therefore, when the Egyptians made their house-to-house search, they said, we don't have to search this house for any babies because they only got together 3 months ago. There's not going to be a newborn baby there. And they figured we only have to search their house 9 months from now. 9 months from their reunion. Moshe Rabbeinu was born 3 months prematurely, according to Chazal. And that's why they were able to hide him for 3 months. Because they knew that the Egyptians wouldn't search their house until 9 months from their remarriage. And Moshe was born 6 months after their remarriage. And therefore they had 3 months. And that's what the Torah says, that they could hide him for 3 months. And after 3 months they had to do something. They put him in a basket, and then I all know the rest of the story. Now, So if he really was born 3 months prematurely, and he was born on the 7th of Adar, when should he have been born? On the 7th of Sivan, 3 months later, which of course is Shavuos, right? So the truth is that Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday is Shavuos.
Wow.
It was just he was born 3 months prematurely, but really he was born on Shavuos, and that's the most appropriate birthday because he's the hero of Shavuos. Now David HaMelech, on the other hand, it's hard to understand what his connection to Shavuos is, because David HaMelech is not the figure associated with Torah, even though he certainly was a great Torah scholar. David HaMelech is associated with prayer. David HaMelech is the author of Tehillim, the author of the Psalms. And David HaMelech says about himself, Va'ani tefillah, I am the embodiment of prayer. I am prayer. I am the essence of prayer. He didn't say I am Torah. He said I am prayer. That's what he was. I always say David HaMelech is our Cyrano de Bergerac, because he gave us the words with which we express our deepest emotions, the emotions that we would have no way of expressing otherwise. He gave us the Tehillim, which is our vehicle for expressing those emotions. And in fact, the prayers are all based on the Tehillim, essentially. Even the Shemona Esrei is really cobbled together from phrases from the Tehillim. So, how does he get here? Now, the idea over here is a very, very, very important thing, which is the blending of Torah study and prayer. The complete Jew has to have both in his life, study and prayer. Can't have one without the other. You see, prayer without study is problematic, because the truth is that there can be no spirituality, there can be no spiritual ascent without Torah study. From a Jewish perspective, that's the reality. So if a person neglects Torah study, what does he pray for? Because his prayers are for material things. He needs a car, he needs money, he needs this, he needs that. So the verse of the Mishlei says that Meisir Ozno Mishmaya Torah, if a person turns his ear from Torah, Gam Tfilasa Toeva, his prayer is an abomination. See, if he is a person who is motivated towards spiritual growth, so when he prays, he's praying even for the material things to facilitate that spiritual growth. That's a very precious thing to God. But if a person is not interested in spirituality, he's Meser Ozno Mishmaya Torah, he turns his ear from Torah, so the prayer becomes a prayer for materialism for the sake of materialism. That's an abomination to God. So you can't have prayer without Torah. You can't have Torah without prayer either. Why? Because Torah without prayer becomes abstract. It becomes theoretical. It's not something which is an expression of your yearnings, your desires. It's like Margaret Mead going to Samoa, studying the natives. It's very interesting. Study primitive societies, how they act, how they live. Torah can also be studied that way. As an anthropologist, this is a study how the ancient Hebrews lived and what they valued and how they worshipped. It's very interesting. It has nothing to do with me. If I go to Africa and visit some cannibal tribe, right, I'm sure I would find it fascinating, but I'm not going to join them. I'm not going to become a cannibal along with them. It's not what I want to do with my life. So likewise, a Torah study without prayer is theoretical, it's abstract, it's anthropological, but it's not something which is a vehicle for the realization of my ambitions, my goals, my dreams. The balance is study and prayer. And it's a very interesting thing, a little tidbit. You may have heard of the great Rav Nachman of Breslov. So Rav Nachman of Breslov had a Talmud, a disciple of Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson really was the person who transcribed the teachings of Rav Nachman in the Sefer Likutei Moharan, his master's teachings. And he also wrote a second book called Likutei Tfilos, a collection of prayers. And this, for each of the Torah teachings of the Rebbe, he composed a prayer that we should be able to fulfill and live up to the lessons that are contained in that teaching, and so on and so forth. And that's this idea of turning your Torah study into a prayer. That it shouldn't remain theoretical and abstract. It should be something which becomes an expression of your deepest sheaf. And therefore, that's the idea that we have two heroes in Shavous, not one. In other words, Moshe, of course, is our hero. That goes without saying. But David is also our hero. There's Moshe and David. This is the optimal balance of study and prayer. That's the complete Jew. And therefore, despite the fact that at first glance it's unexpected, we incorporate David into the observance of Shavuos because we understand that the highest fulfillment of Torah is not simply learning it in a theoretical sense. The highest fulfillment of Torah is that which I learned I should aspire to achieve, and that of course is what my prayer is. I pray to be able to do that. So therefore we have David, who is the embodiment of tefillah, prayer, and Moshe, who is the embodiment of Torah. Okay, everyone should have a very happy Shavuos.